becoming known. And we were going to have this celebration in Germany at this wine fair, which was obviously canceled in March. But we did get this award, which kind of freaks me out, because I can still remember what 20 something years ago, when I was still training to be a doctor, and I would occasionally go out with a salesperson trying to sell wine on my day off, and people not even knowing what Malbec was, and not knowing that we sold wine in Argentina, and this was all over the world. Like basically the only people who knew Argentine wine were Argentines. Nobody else, in Europe, North America, Asia, even in other parts of Latin America, people didn't really know much about Argentine wine, even if we were actually the fourth largest producer in the world of wine back then, but we were drinking all the wine ourselves.
Yeah.
I have to admit somebody, because I think now I'm the host.
Yeah, you're the host, so you need to do the admitting.
Okay, so anyhow, so we got this award, and it seems kind of crazy, because although we've been making wine since 1902, since my great grandfather made his first wine. He was Italian, he came to Argentina, but to get this award when it seems like not that long ago that nobody knew Malbec, that nobody knew our family, it just goes to show how nice people are.
Laura, I took 4 days of classes to take in 1987. I took 4 days of classes to take the Master Sommelier exam, taught by Master Sommeliers. And, it was exhaustive covering wine in the world. There was no mention whatsoever of South American wine. There was no mention of Australian wine. There was no mention of New Zealand wine. In probably 40 hours of classes on wines of the world, there was no mention of those areas. It was all Europe and a little bit California, but very even California wine.
Well, and I think that the same can be said about places like Oregon and even Washington State. When I was getting started with, helping my dad, I mean, most people didn't even know about Oregon.
Right.
So yeah.
You're exactly right. Not until Veronique Drouhin came and all of a sudden it put Oregon on the map. They'd been making wine there,
Exactly.
but,
right.
David Ladd and people like that, but until Veronique Drouhin came, and it kind of made the Willamette Valley respectable. So Laura, we should start with the Chardonnay and then Malbec and then Cabernet, or Cabernet and then Malbec?
Okay, so let me look at, because I think I have my list here. I actually have to look at no, it's in my I had my link. Give me a second. But I would usually do Chardonnay first.
Yeah.
Let me just go to my list. I have it right here. Okay, so we are doing the Tupungato Chardonnay, the Cab Franc, and the La Consulta Malbec. Is that right?
Correct. Some people are going to be tasting Cabernet Sauvignon, and some people are going to be tasting Cabernet Franc, because some people are not in, this group is pretty spread out. And one of the reasons that I chose to ask you to join us for this is because, one, your wines are special and wonderful, but also they're pretty widely available. So I thought people in, here's someone from Oregon, people around from various parts of the country would be able to find your wines. But not everyone was able to find the Cabernet Franc. So some people are going to be tasting Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh, look at this. TK Ryopel is saying that he's from Oregon, or I think it's a he. TK is a he.
I don't know.
So, and he was traveling in South America in the 80s and 90s and used to bring home Argentinian wine. That's a person I like. Thanks for being here. Oh, it was the San Antonio Spurs, by the way. Manu Ginobili, San Antonio Spurs.
Yeah, he played with Tim Duncan, who's another one of the greatest players ever.
That's right. He's very good friends with Tim Duncan.
Yeah. So Chardonnay, Cabernet, Malbec, or Chardonnay, Malbec, Cabernet?
I would do Chardonnay, Cabernet, Malbec, or Cabernet Franc, Malbec. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I think you have a little presentation that you want to do.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, thank you. And Hoyt, I want to make sure, am I saying your name correctly? Is it,
Yes.
it's Hoyt?
Hoyt, yes.
Hoyt, okay, very good. That's easier than Gualtajari.
It's
Okay.
it's all easy.
Okay, wait 1 second. I'm gonna do my desktop. Okay, are we good here? Are you guys seeing the presentation?
Yes.
You are? Okay, let me actually make it a little bigger. So let's see, 1 second. Okay, how's that? Is that good?
Fantastic.
Okay, great. So over there where I'm sitting is on this little lookout to the Adriana Vineyard that I was telling you about before. That's at 5,000 feet elevation, this amazing place. And you see in the background the mountains and the snow. And you know what's really striking about Mendoza, where I'm from, is that you always know whether you're going north, south, east, west, because you use the mountains to as your location. So you don't even need.
Excuse me, Laura. I think there are people that need to be admitted.
Oh, oh my God, you're right. Wait, I have this full waiting room. Oh my God, that's so rude. I didn't notice that. Okay, thank you for telling me, Hoyt.
So once you've done with your presentation, make me the host again so you don't have to deal with it.
I will. Okay. I think I let everybody in. I want to apologize to all of you that went in. It was not Hoyt preventing you from coming in. It was me because I didn't see it. I'm very sorry to all of you. Okay. All right. So I'm in this magical place here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit the family story, and please start opening the wines and drinking the wines. And when we get, to the actual technical sheet of the wine, I'll tell you about your specific wine. But my favorite thing is if you can have, 3 glasses of wine and actually pour yourself all 3 wines and start tasting them, and maybe even taking some notes or writing some questions. And also, Hoyt, if you don't mind, if you can check the chat. I love being interrupted.
I'm doing that.
Yeah. So basically, anytime, Hoyt, that you want to interrupt me, and if there's a question, even if it's not related to what I'm saying, just go ahead and interrupt me, because it'll be a lot more fun for everybody. Okay. So
let me just say, I really encourage everyone to ask questions, because it will make it a lot more interesting and fun for everyone if you do ask questions. But use the chat feature to ask questions, so we're not talking over each other. So the chat button is the best way to ask questions, but I hope everyone will ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, and we'll try to finish also with some time that people can actually ask questions live. You can put it in the chat, or in fact, if you feel like you really want to ask the question yourself, go ahead and say so. Okay, so this is the family of my great-grandfather, Nicolas Catena. Catena actually means chain in Italian. Most people don't know that. In Spanish, it's cadena, but in Italian means chain. And he came from Le Marche, which is over the Adriatic side, on the eastern side of Italy, about a little north of where Rome is on the western side. And he married Anna Moscetta. They were from the same village in Italy, but she was part of the family that hosted him when he arrived. They knew his parents in Italy. And they had these 6 children. And my grandfather is the oldest one, the one all the way to the left with the fancy striped tie. And I like to show this picture because I once asked my father about this picture. And he said, yeah, my grandfather, who's the guy in the middle, Nicola, and his wife, was really proud that he had left a winery and a vineyard to each one of his sons. And I said, well, what did he leave to his daughters? And he said, well, he was equally as proud that he had found each one of his daughters a husband. And, I was kind of thinking there, like, wow, this doesn't sound like a really good deal. And I said, okay, Dad, I found my own husband. So I want a winery and a vineyard. And, I have to say that my dad has kept his promise with equality. And, I have a brother and a sister, and well, my sister's a historian, but she's actually working with the winery now. My brother makes his own wines, but really, we've all kind of done other things and then come to work at the family winery. And and it's just really, really fun. But my dad is a great mentor to women, probably because his mother was the headmaster of the local school where he grew up. She was somebody that thought that, everything could be achieved through education. She believed in education more than anything else. She was a super hard worker. She basically ran, school for kids over the weekend. My dad says she paid very little attention to him because she was mostly paying attention to her students. They would basically come to the house to get extra lessons. But he did grow up with this search for knowledge, and that's what basically took him, to the United States, where he went to school at Columbia University, studied economics, and then later on, where he was inspired by Robert Mondavi's revolution, and this challenge that the Californians had sort of thrown the gauntlet at France and said, hey, you don't own fine wine. We're going to make wines that can compete with the best wines of France. And my father said, well, if Mr. Mondavi can do this in California, why not me in Argentina? And right now that that our families is fairly well known, you say, okay, that was a good idea. But actually, when he decided to do this in the 80s, that was considered completely insane because, first of all, nobody knew Argentina, and nobody knew if Argentina could make this kind of quality wines. And that's really been our journey over the last 25 years is following my father's vision of making Argentine wines that can stand with the best of the world. But it all starts with this Italian man who, honestly, I think that if you'd asked them at the time of that photo, if a woman would be running his winery, he would have said no. And if you'd asked him if we'd be selling wine in the United States, he would have said no. And if you'd said to him that we'd be selling wine in Italy, he would say no. And if we'd be selling wine in Vietnam, he would have said no. So, times have changed. And I think that most of our forefathers, obviously yours included, could not predict the world we live in today.
Excuse me, Laura.
Yes.
Excuse me. Do you know Gaia?
Yes. She is a dear friend.
I assumed as much. When we had one of these conversations with her, and when her father went to the city, the municipal building, to register her name when she was born, he was told that he couldn't name her Gaia because it wasn't a saint's name. It was required by law that you name your daughter after the saint of the day that she was born on. And so that was how the girls were named, and the boys were named for their grandfather. So it's Angelo Giovanni, Angelo Giovanni, Angelo Giovanni. But when she decided she wanted to be part of the family business, and she wanted to go to enology school, they initially told her she couldn't go to enology school in Milan because she was a woman. She was Angelo Gaia's daughter, and she couldn't be a winemaker.
And I'll tell you one thing, though, to my father's credit, and I love Angelo, like he's a dear friend. But from what Gaia tells me and the Antinori girls, it is actually much harder in Italy than it is in Argentina still, and in France. I have a lot of friends. I can't say the names because they might get in trouble, but they say to me, Laura, you're lucky because my father would never put a woman in charge of the family business. I've been told this by multiple European women. And there's also other wineries that are run by women, like, Marilisa Allegrini, like there's plenty. But it is actually, I feel in Argentina, it's actually easier. Like, I think in the US, it's more common. There's so many women running family wineries right now. I actually did a great, really fun event talking about Oregon at Vinitaly this year that, was ran on Zoom. I did a really great wine tasting with Maria Ponzi.
Wow.
Because, she was telling her story, the Italian story. So we both told our Italian story. And she wrote that book, Pinot Girl, which is actually a really nice book. I don't know if you've seen it, but yeah, like it is actually great to talk to other women in wine to share our experiences. And in terms of the names, actually, my great grandfather Nicola, he was forced to change his name to Nicolás because you couldn't actually name, even if there were, you know, like half the people, actually 70% of Argentines have Italian heritage. So, you know, there were more Italian heritage people than Spanish heritage people in Argentina, but it was illegal to name your kid with an Italian name. It could only be a Spanish name. So,
and do you think of yourself as a pioneer among female winery owners / winemakers?
Well, for sure, when I started, there were not many women. I mean, at our winery, well, you know, Susana Balbo, who is a very famous winemaker from Argentina, she actually worked first at our winery. You know, I definitely was a pioneer in my generation, because, you know, in a way, I'm one of the older ones of my generation. You know, I'm a little older than Gaia, and I'm probably the same age as the older Antinori sister. But the thing is, my dad, because my dad does not like to do events and wine tastings and travel around, he basically handed things off to me. He basically said, "Oh, you're much better at this than me. Bye bye, go do it."
Yeah. Well, when I first started in the wine business, there were a handful of female winery. Well, I'm not sure there were any female winery owners other than Corinne Mensalopoulos at Chateau Margaux.
Corinne was very important, and then there was Philippine de Rocha. She was very inspirational.
Yeah. Well, and Claude Laflave at Domaine Laflave.
And Lalou Bisleroy.
And of course, Lalou, yeah. But so, and then along came Helen Turley and Heidi Barrett.
Yeah.
But now it seems like, I mean, we had an event with Elisa Scavino from Paolo Scavino, and she said, if you want to have female children in Piedmont, drink a lot of wine, because all the families here, this generation, it's all female now. And if you think about it, Gaia and Domenico Clerico and Scavino, and they're all run by women now.
Yeah, but you know what? Ask them if their oldest kid is a boy, what they would have done. I'll tell you, the Italians would choose the guy if they have a guy. But you know, like the Antinoris, there's 3 girls. There's no choice. I don't know. I've had some conversations with Gaia that, and I would say in Argentina, there's some issues also. I mean, my dad is literally, you know, he's so pro women, he's pro woman, he's pro man, he's pro people. He just looks at people as, you know, for their talent, for their true talent. And, you know, I think that's how the young people are these days. Like my kids' generation, they literally, they don't think of the sex of the person for a job or for their capacity. And I think my dad's kind of like that. He's like a millennial in everything. He actually thinks like a millennial. He's so innovative. He always wants to do new things. Like he's really into organic farming right now. He's obsessed. Like we're turning all our farming into organic, and like he's reading all the latest research and talking to people, and you know, he's and that's how we all think. So whatever the age of somebody at Catena, you're thinking like, you know, the way young people have that kind of, you know, romanticism and vision for the future, and you know that kind of like always keeping that with you. I feel like my dad is still you know, instilling that spirit of innovation, of never, you know, sitting still, that sometimes you have more when you're young. Although, you know, looking at my dad, we still think that he has the better memory than any of us that are younger than him, and more energy. And he just turned 81. So there's hope for for me, I hope, as I get older.
So, well, you just answered Suzanne's question. So let's get on with your presentation.
Wait, I just want to show real quickly a picture with my dad. This is him, guys. Wow. Isn't he cute? I love him. Yeah. Okay, all right. So my presentation. So Argentina is the little triangle in the bottom of South America. You see the Andes on the western side, and on the other side is Chile, Atlantic Ocean on the east, Pacific Ocean on the other side of Chile. And then that little yellow area marked kind of in the middle, that is the province of Mendoza. So Mendoza would be like saying California. It's like, it's a state. And 70% of the wine in Argentina is made in Mendoza. And if you look at the photo, you see that there's like the brown, that means the Andes Mountains. And you see that it's pretty dry, right? Because usually where there's more water, you're going to see more green. So the pampas, where all the cows are grazing, and we have all this incredible grass-fed beef in Argentina, that's to the east, all that green part, as you go to the Atlantic Ocean, and also towards the northeast. And then, further northeast, you go to Brazil, and that's tropical. But where Mendoza is, it's quite dry and it's mountain terrain. And that's why it's particularly amazing for making wine. So wait, I just want to make sure. Okay, I'm gonna go back to that chart afterwards. So just, I was just telling you about the mountains, and this is a little bit of geeky soil stuff. But basically, the mountains form, 150 million years ago. There's these plaques that are banging, and then about 20 to 40 million years ago, the mountains go up. And then during all these ice ages, the ice is melting down, there's rivers, and you see these little like pancake looking things. That's an alluvial cone. And what happens is that, as the ice melts and the rivers come down, you get deposition of really very sexy soil, because you get a lot of calcium carbonate, which is the component of limestone that what it does is it provokes through a change in pH and potassium, it provokes a higher acidity. So lower pH, higher acidity, lower pH in the wines. And the combination of these soils, which have this particular pH, but also are very well drained because there's a lot of stones, and the high altitude, which makes cool climate, are just the perfect situation for making great wine. Because to make great wine, you want a soil that's not too fertile. It's not too, and you also don't want an environment that's too humid, because the grapevine is very susceptible to diseases, because it has the little thin skins. It's not like an orange or an apple that has like thick skins. Like it's very fragile. And so you want this dry weather, well-drained soils, and that's what we have in Mendoza. And because as these glaciers were melting, you were getting different deposits. So higher up, you got the bigger stones because the river can't carry them. And then as you go all the way down, you get clays. You get these little micro terroirs. The French call them climat or crus. We call them parcelas, that give you wine that has different flavors. So basically, there's just thousands and thousands of different micro parcels of where you can get wines with different flavors. And I'm just going to show you a little example of what I was talking about, the calcium carbonate. You see like that white stuff on that stone. These are the stones. And there's two things about this. It's the pH of the soil, but also there's some research that shows that microbiome, that the microbiota that lives in calcium rich soils is particularly rich because they retain a little bit of water, the calcium. And so that allows the root systems to live with these bacteria that help the roots absorb nutrients and withstand problems with salinity or water stress. So this is really a magical place to make wine.
Laura, may I interrupt
yeah.
with one question? I'm not sure your great grandfather couldn't have predicted this, but with global climate change and people people making wine all over the world struggling with the results of that, and grapes riper earlier, and alcohol levels that are out of control, and Mendoza seems like it's pretty well cited to deal with that because it is such high elevation. Are you experiencing much global? I don't like to call it global warming, global climate change in Mendoza.
No, but Hoyt, that is a very, very good question. So, I mean, the whole world is experiencing climate change. Now, for us, the temperature changes in the southern hemisphere are a little less dramatic than in the northern hemisphere. And they're in the North Pole, they're worse than in Antarctica. However, they're significant. The main problem for us is the issue of water, because there's less ice in the glaciers, and we need that water because there were these irrigation canals that were built by the American Indians. When I say American Indians, like we're South America, they're also called American Indians. And the American Indians built these canals that brought the water from the glaciers, and we still use those canals to water our vineyards because it's so dry that you need some water. And watering in Argentina is done in a really traditional way. Like it's you never flood. Like it's done like with small amounts, almost like it was the rain, but it's mostly so that the vines, are a little stressed, but not too stressed. But anyhow, going back to your question. So I actually wrote an article for the Journal of Wine Economics a couple of years ago, because in a way, what we did with my father, starting in the 1980s, moving most of our vineyards to higher altitudes, cooler climate, because we were looking for better acidity and concentration. That was basically combating climate change before climate change was talked about, or before it was really widely known. So we already kind of did the dramatic shifting of regions that is now happening in other places, or that's going to have to happen in many places, because they might want to grow Bordeaux varieties in Burgundy. They probably could right now. I don't know what's going to happen. The one thing I would say, just so that we don't all get completely depressed, is that there is a lot of viticultural research that allows you, to farm in areas that are a little too warm. And there's many things you can do through the canopy and through, cover crops and the way you manage the vineyard, so that you can extend, the weather that the vine can be comfortable with. So I don't think that we're looking at, in 50 years, nobody growing the same varieties. Even with the climate change that's predicted, I think we're going to be able to grow some of the same varieties in the places where they're grown right now. 100 years, that's a little more complex. Then we might have to change varieties, and we might need to use hybrids, because there might be viruses. I mean, these viruses that we're seeing for humans, we have the same issue with vines. And that's another big topic, but that would be like a 3-hour conference. So we're not going to do that. Okay, so I want to show you guys this chart, because this is actually an answer to Hoyt's question. So my son is doing a PhD in chemistry, and he always tells me the biggest mistake presenters do is not to explain what's on the chart. So I'm going to follow his instructions. So this is the Winkler classification of wine regions. There was a professor, really famous professor at Davis, Professor Winkler, who came up with what was called a degree days summation that allowed you to classify regions into from colder to warmer. So if you go all the way to the left, you see where it says region 1, 2, 3, 4. These would be Winkler regions 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 is the coldest, 4 is the warmest. Then where it says classification, you see, cold, temperate, warm. Then the some degrees Celsius basically is the calculation of temperatures over 10 degrees Celsius for the 6 months before harvest. So that basically, you see that for the cooler regions, it's a smaller number than for the warmer regions. Okay, and then let's go now straight. Let's skip local areas, because that's Argentina, and let's go to international areas. So the international areas in the region 1, which is the coldest, would be Burgundy and Champagne. So if you think about it, varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir like cool climate. And to make sparkling wine, you really need a pretty cool climate. That's why, for example, in Italy, the sparkling wines are made in the north, in the Veneto, like the Prosecco. Champagne, is either north of Burgundy. And then Burgundy makes still Pinot Noir and Chardonnay in cooler climate than Bordeaux. Then if you go to zone 2, you've got Barolo, Bordeaux, Côte d'Iron, La Rioja in Spain, and actually some parts of the Napa Valley or Russian River would go into zone 2. And then zone 3 would be, or Oregon. Oregon would be actually zone 2, and there might be even some places that are zone 1. And then 3 would be Napa Valley and Chianti Classico, which are a little warmer. And then zone 4 would be Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So now let's go to where it says local areas. That's Argentina. So zone 1 would be some parts of Gualtallarí, which is right where the Adriana vineyard I was telling you about is. Then there's the slightly warmer part of Gualtallarí is zone 2. And then we have a whole slew of regions that make really good wine, like Altamira, Agrelo, Villavastías. The wines that we're having today are between zone 2 for the Chardonnay and some years zone 2, some years zone 3 for the Cabernet Franc, and for the, wait, which Malbec are we having? Which appellation?
The Consulta.
De la Consulta. So that De la Consulta is where near Altamira. So that would be zone 3. So it's closer to Napa. And then Lulunta would be slightly warmer area. And I don't think we're having a wine from there now. So now, here's the big difference. If you're trying to go from Châteauneuf du Pape to Champagne, you're talking about a 6 to 7 hour drive. If you're going from Lulunta in Argentina to Gualtajari Highlands, it's 45 minutes. And so like that's really the way you understand this idea of altitude and climate, because in a very short distance, because you're going up, you go from a warmer to a cooler climate. And that's really the luxury of making wine in Argentina, that you have all these little different terroirs very close to each other. So you can either bottle them individually, like the wines we're going to drink today, or you can make altitude blends.
Excuse me, Laura.
Yes.
I was told by Weinbo that you are limited by your staff to 1 hour for these presentations.
Well,
and if you're only spending an hour with us, we have 30 minutes left, and we haven't talked about the Chardonnay yet. So
okay, let's do that. Yeah,
I'm thrilled to spend. I'm ecstatic to spend more than an hour with you, but I don't want you to get in trouble with anyone.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the reason for the rule, Hoy, is actually to spare our guests, because what I find is that once you get to an hour, they get tired. So that's the reason we've experimented enough, but thank you. So let's go ahead and taste the Chardonnay. This is a little glimpse of the appellations wine. So this is a line of wine that come from single appellations. And I love this slide because each one of these regions is at a different altitude and has different traditions. So for example, you know, the one where it says Lulunta on the top, and you see this man standing in the vineyard, this is the place where you have a lot of old vines. You see those tiny little vines? Those are old vines. Then to the right, that's actually what the La Consulta looks like. We're gonna have that wine later. You see all those stones? That's what's distinctive about that region. Okay, so let's actually go to the Chardonnay. Okay, very good. So is everybody tasting?
Yes, should be.
I'm actually drinking the Cab Franc because that's the one I had. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing so that we can taste this wine together, because I want to look at you guys. Oh, somebody was asking about the some degrees Celsius. I think, okay, I think I explained that. There's another question about what altitude are most of your vineyards sitting at? So if you go from remember in the chart I showed you before, the warmest to the coldest, you go from around 2,700 feet elevation to about 5,000 feet elevation. Oh, there's somebody trying to enter. Okay. So, yes, and there was a question from Paul and Holly about the slides being available for us to read in depth later. That would be fine. If you guys want to ask Hoyt to send you the presentation, that would be fine.
I'll get them from Doug at Weinbo later. Okay. And if you would like to see them, you can email me, hoyt@sunfishcellars.com, and I will forward them to you. Right, Doug?
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Yes. Okay, so this wine, the Chardonnay, the Tupungato Chardonnay, comes from a vineyard that's around 4,100 feet elevation. It's got a really stony soil. So picture these stones that I was showing you later, but actually much bigger. Like in that vineyard, the stones are, you know, kind of like, you know, two hands put together. It has really good drainage, and it has a lot of this calcium carbonate I was telling you about. That you know, there's a lot of calcium carbonate in Burgundy, in some parts of Ribera del Duero. It's like, it's a component. Oh, there's another person trying to be admitted. Okay. So in terms of style, and I would love to get some opinions from you guys. So to me, this wine really sits between the old world and the new world. And I don't love this the old world, new world distinction, because the soils are not older in the old world. You know, the world is the world, and there's no such thing as a, you know, an old world geology. Although some soils are older than others, but it's not related to Europe versus, you know, the Americas or Asia or whatever. So, but however, if you think of the wine world in terms of old world and new world, you know, people tend to think of, you know, old world as less oaky, maybe a little more mineral, more like, you know, if you think of Chablis or something, you know, which is a Chardonnay from Burgundy, and then they think of, you know, new world as creamier with more oak. I actually think that there's so many producers, you know, in California, in Oregon, you know, making these really, you know, high acidity white wines that, you know, I don't think you can make that distinction anymore. But I'd love to know your guys' opinions from tasting the Chardonnay, what your thoughts are. Anybody want to do a little typing and put some words in the chat? Or wait, Hoyt, can they be unmuted? Can they unmute themselves, or you'd have to
Yes,
do
they
it?
can unmute themselves.
Oh, okay. So does anybody want to?
Well, I'll answer.
I'd be glad to jump in.
Oh,
great.
perfect.
With the Chardonnay, I'm tasting kind of a muskmelon or white cherries initially, and then the aftertaste is kind of a grapefruit rind or a kumquat flavor to me. And I don't know if anybody tastes that or not, but and we're drinking our wine at about 48 degrees.
Oh, so
Wow.
that's pretty cool. I also like my Chardonnays nice and chilled. And well, I agree with the kumquat. I'm sort of obsessed with kumquats, so I'm really happy that you felt a little kumquat in this wine. But I could see that, and I think that for sure the melon, I agree, because you know this is a wine that has some ripe characters, but it also has a lot of florals and some minerality. So yeah, I totally see the you know what you're smelling and tasting in it. That would be Chip, I believe. Thank you, Chip. Any other comments? I think Hoyt, you wanted to say something.
Well, I applaud Chip and Ann. You know, people tell me a lot in my role in the wine business that they don't like white wine because they're boring, white wines because they're boring. And generally, when someone tells me that, I ask them what temperature they drink white wine at, and almost universally they say, "Well, I just take it out of the refrigerator and pour myself a glass." And you know, refrigerators are 35 degrees. And when you taste, you know, if you mentioned Louise Leroy, if we took one of her a bottle of Leroy Romanée Samivon and poured it at 35 degrees, we would, you know, it wouldn't have any flavor. So, you know, I think this wine, I think they're right on. I think 50 degrees is about perfect for 50 degrees Fahrenheit is about perfect for this wine. So that's kudos to you. And then the other thing people tell me a lot is they don't like Chardonnay. And generally my response is, well, you probably don't like overly oaky Chardonnay, but there's an awful lot of Chardonnay in the world that's not overly oaky. And let me introduce you to one. And I think this is a pretty good example of more of a fruit-driven wine with some acidity and minerality that isn't dominated by oak. I like it a lot.
And what do you say, Hoyt, in terms of the old world, new world?
Well, I think if I, you know, when I taste wine, I always think about what would I think if I tasted it blind, because that's the best, you know, gauge. And I think I would recognize it as a new world. I hope, I hope I would identify it as a new world wine. Because it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't taste like white Burgundy or Chablis. So then where do you go from there? Do you go to Australia or New Zealand or California or Oregon or Washington State or Argentina? you know, I'm sure you know that this wine got very high scores from the press.
Yeah.
And I mean, for a wine in this price point, it got really, and I think they're merited. I think it's a really, really excellent wine. But I'm so biased, and I'm not. This isn't me blowing. Thank you. This isn't me blowing smoke up your skirt, trying to thank you for joining us tonight. This is. I've said this many times. Doug will vouch for this. Your wines. This is what I say about Catena Zapata. Your wines are always a great value, whether it's the Telia wines that we sell for $10, or the Appellation Series wines that are between 15 and 20, or the, you know, wines, the $300 single vineyard wines. They all overperform. I think it's an amazing, it's almost universal with your wines. They overperform at the price point, which is really all that you can ask a wine to do.
Well, Hoyt, you would make my dad very happy, because when I started working with him, and you know, I'd studied medicine and biology, and I didn't know anything about selling anything or, you know, business. I understood the vineyard and fermentation, you know, is fairly straightforward. But I didn't know anything about, you know, business. And I said, Dad, you know, what is this term marketing? What does that mean? And he said to me, he said, Laurita, he calls me Laurita. He said, listen, I'm going to make it very simple for you. If you can deliver a wine that's twice as good as the competition. So if your $20 wine can be as good as the $40 wines from other people, you know, if your $40 wine can be as good as the $100 wines from other people, you will always win. And then you won't even need to know what marketing is. And really the philosophy of our team has always been over deliver in quality. And that's not always easy to do, because, you know, you have some better vintages and some not as good. And, you know, some years we have to make less wine. But we actually have this process where we blind taste our wines against the competition at twice the price to see if our wines are in the same league. And if they're not, then they're not good enough, because they need to be as good as wines that are twice their price. And, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, we necessarily achieve that with every wine, because it's somewhat subjective, but we actually go through that exercise. And that's really the goal of our winemakers, to make a wine that's double, you know, the value. So it makes me so happy what you're saying. But I don't want to miss mentioning some of the chat conversation. So Paul Lund said Old World, which, you know, what I would answer to that is that I think that this wine is a little bit of a mix. So it's hard to pin it down, but I think it's got some Old World and some New World characters. But again, what is Old World, New World these days? It's hard to tell because so much has changed in style. Then TK talked about minerality, grapefruit, grasses, crisp with a fairly long finish for a white. I mean, that is like poetry. I want to take that blurb and put it in my website. Thank you. And then Doug said some really, really nice things about getting a giant smile when he opens a bottle of Catena. So thank you, Doug.
Well, Laura, Doug is your sales. Doug sells your wines here, so he may be a little bit biased.
He counts too, Hoyt. Come on.
But I agree with him 100%.
Yeah.
The thing about it, here's the thing. A $16 Argentine Chardonnay has a different purpose than a $600 Grand Cru White Burgundy, or a $200 Grand Cru Chablis, or your White Bones or White Stones Chardonnays. This wine, there's a different place for it in life. And that's just opening a bottle, pouring yourself a glass, and it's just really delicious. It doesn't require a lot of cerebral, you know, attitude. It's not an intellectual wine. It's just really delicious. And it's perfect. I mean, that's what you want from a $16 Argentine Chardonnay, is that you open it, pour yourself a glass, and it's just delicious. Yeah, what you want from the White Stones is a very different thing. Yeah. What you want from La Flave Montrachet is a very different thing.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not allowed to show up at my husband's aunt's house without a bottle of the Catena Chardonnay.
There you go.
it is a very nice to drink wine. And you know, I totally agree. You know, white stones and white bones are, you know, another league. Like, you know, the great, you know, the Grand Crus from Burgundy. But I have to say that, you know, we we occasionally will open a bottle of Catena Chardonnay, you know, like very equivalent to this Tubungato Chardonnay from the 90s or from the 2000s, and you'd be surprised at how well these wines keep through time. And you know, I'm surprised myself at how and you know, and then it becomes a more cerebral wine. But I agree with you, most people should drink it when it's young. So okay, so let's move to the Cabernet Franc. So that's what I'm drinking. You know, a lot of people don't know a ton about Cabernet Franc because, you know, it's one of the 5 Bordeaux varieties. So the 5, to be called a Bordeaux wine, you have to be made of 1 or 5 of the 5 varieties. So those would be Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. And actually, what many people don't know is that between the 17th, 18th, and 19th century, till the beginning of the 19th century, there was actually more Malbec planted in Bordeaux, you know, where the famous Latour, Lafite, all those, you know, the Grand Crus come from. There was more Malbec planted than Cabernet Sauvignon because the French really prized the Malbec because it had, you know, beautiful fruit, color, and had these smooth tannins. And I read several ancient French texts that would say, never bottle the Cabernet Sauvignon alone, always bottle it with Malbec. But what happened after phylloxera, which was this plague that basically came from the Americas and these little ornamental plants, and then, you know, attacked all the vineyards in Europe so that they had to replant with grafting. You know, this all happened in the late 1800s. But, oh, there's C. Meyer trying to be admitted. So what happened was, oh, should I, wait, should I?
Yeah, make me the host again. Make me the
Make you the
host.
host, yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm a little nervous that I'm forgetting to admit people.
Right.
So
Well,
remind.
let me handle that.
Wait, so wait, I go to I go to participants.
You just go to my screen and click on the 3 dots.
Oh, I didn't know that I could do it that way. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, perfect. Okay. Rename, chat, make host. There you go. I just did it. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so basically Cabernet Franc is one of the Bordeaux varieties. Malbec doesn't get replanted in France, mainly because it was very susceptible to cold, and they had this thing called the Little Ice Age, where they had all these really cold years, and the yields on the Malbec were way down. And Malbec was considered a somewhat delicate grape, and Cabernet Sauvignon is a less delicate grape. And in fact, we have that situation in Argentina. If we have a really big frost, usually the Malbec is more affected than other varieties. But you know, that's not usually a big problem in Argentina, even in the altitude, because we have little slopes. So what ends up happening is Malbec basically disappears in France because they think, oh no, this grape is too delicate. It comes to Argentina where we have all this beautiful sun and these incredible soils, and it's kind of like, you know, the successful immigrant story, but for a grape. And you know, and then in France, you know, they start planting more Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. But there has been actually a real kind of increase in the value, in the valoración. I don't know how you say that in English, like in how much producers love Cabernet Franc, because Cabernet Franc is interesting. It's very similar to Cabernet Sauvignon in that it has like that kind of pepperiness and what we call pyrazines, which is, you know, that thing that gives Cabernet that slight edge. Like even think of Sauvignon Blanc. It has because Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon are actually related. They have one same parent. And no, actually, I think that Cabernet Sauvignon.
Cabernet Sauvignon is a crossing of Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Franc.
Right. So they're actually like mother and child.
Right.
So basically that kind of pepperiness and like that slight green thing that you get in Cabernet Sauvignon in Sauvignon Blanc is the same pyrazine that you get in Cabernet Sauvignon. And Cabernet Franc has that too, but it has a little more fruit. And I think the tannins, it depends on where you grow it. If you grow it in a very cool climate, Cabernet Franc will have like pretty hard tannins. But so it has a lot of the structure that you have in Cabernet Sauvignon, but with a little more floral and a little bit more fruit in the nose. So today I think that in many regions, like there's even some really beautiful Cabernet Francs, you know, from Washington, from California, you know, there's Chinon, there's some parts of France that make Cabernet Franc based wines. There's even some places in Northern Italy. What I love about this Cabernet Franc is that I think it has, you know, all the exuberance of Cabernet, but it has like just beautiful florals. It has great texture. And, you know, right now in Argentina, Cabernet Franc is extremely fashionable. So it is like the price of this wine. The only reason we sell this wine is because we love you guys and we like Winebow, and Winebow tells us, hey, you know, everybody loves this wine. You can't stop selling it to me, because I could sell all this Cabernet Franc because we don't have that much planted. We have 27 hectares of Cabernet Franc in our vineyards. So, you know, I could sell all of this in Argentina, you know, in some of like our higher priced wines. But, you know, but then I would leave the world without getting to taste this wine. We're actually planting more Cabernet Franc, but right now there is actually a scarcity of Cabernet Franc. So actually, usually when we release it, it just kind of runs out and we don't have a lot of it available. So I think it's just such a beautiful wine. It also got really good reviews. But the bad news is that, you know, it's not like you're going to see this explosion of Cabernet Franc from Argentina, because there's about, you know, 1,200 hectares of Cabernet Franc planted and 45,000 of Malbec, just to get an idea.
Well, that's your father's fault.
Yeah. No. Before my father made Malbec famous, there was already, Malbec was the most widely planted variety. But you are right in a sense, because when my father decided, hey, I'm going to make a great Malbec again, like I'm going to bring Malbec back from extinction. I'm going to show that the Malbec, that the French made a mistake by not replanting it. Malbec was basically forgotten and it was being pulled out in Argentina. In fact, half of the Malbec had been pulled out when my father started to talk about Malbec and when he exported the first Catena Malbec. And then it was really the success, you're right, that our family had with Malbec that then kind of propulsed like the whole region to start exporting. But there was always more Malbec planted than Cabernet Franc.
But
Yeah.
if he hadn't had the genius to decide to plant it at high altitudes, it wouldn't be the force that it would, the wine, it wouldn't be the force that it is in the world today. It wouldn't. It is such an amazing wine because he had the genius to plant it at, you know, 1,000 meters.
Well, you know, I have to agree with, you know, the comment, you know, where you added the high altitude, because I think that Malbec is a delicious wine in like the traditional parts of Mendoza, but it's not, you know, an Adriana Vineyard worthy wine or a wine with the concentration that, you know, well, let's talk about the Malbec now. You know, again, this is a Malbec that comes from a region that is like, I call it our, you know, La Consulta, I call it our Pomerol, because you get these really rich Malbecs with really soft, sweet tannins, and it's not from sugar. It's just the Malbec from this place tastes sweet, but it's totally dry. And, you know, we think it's these polysaccharides in the actual variety. It's the soils. We don't really know what it is. But the thing is, this kind of texture and richness, you don't get that in some of the more traditional areas where Malbec was planted before my dad decided to go and plant in the higher altitudes. And literally, you know, in half the places where we planted vineyards, like vineyards that are famous today, there were no grapes planted because people thought it was too cold. And now with global warming, it's definitely not too cold. But you know, but yeah, he had the vision to say, okay, if I want to make more age-worthy, better wines, I need to move to cooler climate. That is true.
You know, your friend, Mr. Gaia, is, you know, a great champion of Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot in Bulgari.
Does that wine, the Darmaggi, does that one have Cabernet Franc?
Darmaggi's a Brunello, right? But he has the Bulgari wine.
The Camarcanda.
Yeah. That's Magari.
Magari.
That's Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is this move in, I mean, what he realized was that when he, you know, decided to start making wine in Bulgari was that there's a lot of parts of Bulgaria that Sangiovese is not really the best grape to grow because it's clay. And so he thought, wow, well, clay does pretty well in Pomerol, so maybe, or Merlot does pretty well in Pomerol, so maybe I should plant some Merlot in Bulgaria. And then he found places where, and then, you know, he ends up with these incredible wines because he actually paid attention to the terroir.
He is a very amazing man. My father and Angela are really good friends, and I'm really good friends with Gaia. And it's been such a privilege to spend time with them. You know, many times we're kind of stuck at an event together, and we managed to chat for a while. And actually, we lived for 6 months in Italy with my family because I was visiting my importers in Italy, and my kids went to school there. So we went to visit Angelo and Gaia, and with my husband and my 2 younger kids. And Gaia basically, she told me, she said, "Oh, I've heard my dad's story so many times. Can I just play with your kids?" And so she took my kids, who I think they were like 6 and 10. And then my daughter said, "I wish Gaia was my mom." I still remind her of that. But and you know what I said? I said, actually, I don't blame you. She's so sweet and so wonderful. And yeah, we just spent the most incredible day with them. And I have to say, they're an extraordinary family. And now, you know, the Rosanna, the other sister, and then Giovanni, the son, who I met when he was like 16 years old, but now he's like a full man, you know, and he's working with Gaia, and it's wonderful.
Giovanni was here about a year and a half ago in this room where I'm sitting.
Really?
Yes. And well, I'll tell you, I had an event with Angelo about 15 years ago. And I had an event with Giovanni about a year and a half ago in person, both of those in person. And I had an event on Zoom with Gaia about 3 months ago. And let's just say they don't leave much to chance because their presentation was word for word the same, separated by 15 years. They said exactly, Gaia said exactly the same things Giovanni said, who said exactly the same things that his father said 15 years ago. I mean, it is very scripted, but Giovanni is about the best looking man on the planet. And he had the tightest blue jeans and the most expensive shoes on I think I've ever seen. And he was really. But
you know what? When I met him on that trip where we were with Gaia, he was a teenager and he had the most pimply face I've ever seen. So I actually remarked when I saw him again a few years later how good looking he was, because he wasn't looking so good at 16.
There's that picture of him on their website looking out the window of this farmhouse. And I mean, he's a movie star. I mean,
yeah, he is. They're all very good looking, and you know what I love for guys, okay, so we don't have a lot of time, so let's talk about books, because this is related to Gaia. So have you read his book, Hoy, the Sori San Lorenzo, Angelo Gaia's book? Okay, so guys, if any of you guys like to read, Angelo Gaia's book, that's about 20 years old, is incredible. You will learn so much about farming, about wine, about, you know, how a family kind of transforms itself into one of the main names in wine in the world. And it's really entertaining. It was actually written by a really famous writer. So Angelo didn't write the book. Basically, somebody came and wrote the book, but interviewed the family. And it's, you know, sometimes, you know, a winemaker might not be the best writer. This is actually a professionally written book. So it's very entertaining. It reads like a page turner. Definitely get this book, you guys. Just look up Angelo Gaia. I think it's called like this, The Story of San Lorenzo or something like that. It's amazing. But I'm going to tell you about my books. So, Hoyt, can I tell them about my books?
I would be hurt if you didn't.
Okay. So this is Vino Argentino. That was my first book, 2010, done by Chronicle Books. And it's basically, if you're going to Argentina, it tells you where to go, about the different regions. It has these short chapters about the different varieties. And it also has like some really good recipes. And basically, like this is the Torrontés ice cream. And so if you're going to Argentina, you can get the book, make some of the recipes. And I didn't just include our family wineries. I actually included 100 different producers, and I feature different producers. And somebody told me you can't write a book about other producers because they're your competitors. But if somebody tells me not to do something, I'm more likely to do it. So I wrote the book, and actually, I mean, everybody sells it at their wineries because it came out really well. And so it's been a really fun book. It's a little outdated in some things, but I think it still works if you're going to Argentina. And then my most recent book, yeah.
Please put the name of the two books in the chat.
Oh, okay. Maria, can you do that? Yeah, Maria will do that. So, and then the second book, Gold in the Vineyards, this is actually a book about the 12 most famous vineyards in the world. And the reason I actually was hoping that somebody else would write this book, the same thing happened with the first book, because I took a lot of writing classes when I was going to school, but I am not a professional writer. On both books, I had a professional editor help me so that the books were well written. The first book, I wanted somebody to write a book about Argentine wine, and I couldn't find somebody that inspired me, so I ended up writing it. And then once you write one book, you feel like you can write another one. And so this is a book that I wanted somebody to write it. So it's why are some vineyards so famous and have lasted through the ages? There's like the Antirori family, 26 generations. How does a wine brand last for 26 generations? And so it's actually an illustrated book. So, I have the book has a lot of illustrations. Okay, I'm going to show you some of my favorite. So there's the chapter on Romanée Conti, which is the famous Burgundian property. And here is the fist fight between the Duchess of Pompadour and the Prince of Conti, and they're fighting over the vineyard. And I kind of tell about the royal intrigue. And then, I just tell a lot of the drama and the adventures and the things that happen to these families that most people actually don't know. And I also teach a little bit about wine. So, for example, Henschke, Hill of Grace, like about the old vines and what the wine is made from. Then I have a really good illustration of how, botrycized wine is made. So there's a lot of illustrations in the book, and the text is pretty easy reading. And this book won the Best in Wine History Award from the Gourmand Book Awards. So sorry that I'm sounding like such a saleswoman, but I'm really the more books I sell, the more the ranking goes up on Amazon.
Well, I think you know what the meaning of the word marketing is now.
There you go. I don't know if I over deliver in my books, but I can tell you that Angela Gaia's book is worth it.
May I ask you 3 more questions?
Yes, of course.
So there's the famous story about the potential merger between Angelo and Robert Mondavi, in which, Angela said it would be like a gnat trying to have sex with an elephant. It wouldn't be enjoyable for either one, and somebody would end up getting killed or something. Have you ever thought about anything with Angelo Gaia, your good friend?
Well, you know that we have a partnership with the Rothschild family from Lafitte, the Bodegas Caro. I don't know if you're familiar with that project.
I don't.
Yeah, so we have Bodegas Caro that it's because they have Los Vascos in Chile, and Bodegas Caro, the first vintage was the year 2000. But in typical Lafitte fashion, I don't think they do a lot of promotional work. So you'd be surprised at how many people in the US don't even know we make wine with the Rothschild family. But we've been doing this for a long time. It's not a big project, but the wines are beautiful. They actually get high ratings. There's Caro, C-A-R-O, which is Malbec Cabernet, and then
I know Caro. I didn't. Oh, of course.
So Caro is our partnership. Yeah. Actually, we talked to many famous people, which I won't say their specific names, but they're all names that have been mentioned today. And the thing is, the Rothschild people were the first people that said, we'll do a 50-50 partnership with you guys where we're equals. Most of the other people were like, okay, we won't put any money, but we want half. And because, we were in Argentina, and the Rothschild people were the ones who really, we felt like, how could we say no to this partnership with what the proposal was? Plus, they are the most famous Cabernet Sauvignon in the world, and we wanted to make this Cabernet Malbec blend because that was the most famous blend in Bordeaux in the 18th and 19th century, and it had disappeared. So we can bring it back to life. And what better than with the Lafitte Rothschild family? So we have that project with Angelo. We've never spoken about it. I think that it would be a good fit. But I don't know that Angelo wants, I think that he's pretty excited about expanding within Italy. And
Yeah, he has the Mount Etna project.
yeah, and we're actually very excited about Argentina itself. Like, we have vineyards in Patagonia right now, in Salta, in La Rioja. There's a place in Argentina called La Rioja. I am personally so excited about Argentina right now that although of course the idea of doing something outside is interesting, I don't know that I would have the energy and the capacity to deliver on the double the quality for the price, you know. So we have had a lot of offers, but the only one that we've done is the Rothschild one, which is really a beautiful project. We've just we're purchasing this year some new vineyards with the project. It's been one of those projects that every year we do a little bit, but the wine keeps on getting more beautiful, and you know, we've become really good friends with the Rothschild family, and I don't know, it's been a great journey with them, but it is a lot of work, and so yeah, I'll tell Angelo next time I see him that you suggested we do something together.
Well, you remember that, to remind him that I gave him this key to the city in Nashville
Okay.
15 years ago. So two more questions.
Yeah.
And so again, Angelo famously talks about wanting to do the green harvest, which his father would, in 1961, his first vintage, wanted to green harvest, and his father considered it a sacrilege to drop the grapes on the ground because the grapes are a gift from God. Is there anything you would like to do that your father doesn't allow?
First, I want to answer the green harvest question. So we really think that when you have very well drained soils and the plant is in balance and of a certain age, if you're farming, especially if you're farming organic and you're doing your viticulture correctly, you don't have to drop fruit. And I've actually had some conversations with Angelo and Gaia, and they actually are not dropping fruit anymore. But they've always talked about dropping fruit in the past. I don't think they drop a lot of fruit now. I think that the main discussion with my dad, but you know, and my dad's very diplomatic, and in the end he kind of tells me I'm right, and I'm never sure if he really believes it. But I think that the main thing that I've changed at the winery, you know, in the vineyard and with the wines, we are remarkably similar in the sense that we both like to test ideas first. Like, we're both very scientifically minded. So even if we're both artists and we believe in the art of winemaking, and you know, so much is subjective, we never just sort of rashly go to do something because some flying winemaker said to do it. We like to do a lot of testing. And you know, I founded the Catena Institute of Wine, where we do 1,000 microvinifications a year in the 90s. And like, my dad and I think very similarly. But where we were very different is that when I started working with my dad, you know, he basically had, you know, 5 people that reported to him. And he basically talked to those 5 people. Those 5 people are amazing. And, you know, my dad's always been very friendly. He's one of those people that walks in and says hi to every single person, you know, from like whoever's sitting in a chair by the front door, whether they work for the winery or not. Like, he's super polite. Like, he's been known to watch a truck driver's kid because who didn't know my dad was the owner of the winery, because my dad was worried the guy was going to leave the kid in the car alone. And like, he basically played with this kid for an hour. So my dad is like, he's like a people's man. But in terms of his management style, he always liked to work with like the top 5 people and then kind of let them do their thing, and very top down. And for me, you know, I come from emergency medicine, where if you're in an emergency room and you have a trauma, like, you better know all the nurse's name, the clerk, the technician, the other doctors. Like, you're a team, and the team is everything, and everybody totally respects each other because everybody's job is so important, and nothing can happen unless everybody does their job well. And this idea of, you know, that I need to know what each you know, level is doing, like from the youngest new people that just started, or from the interns who are doing like harvest, to the head winemaker. I want to know all of them, what they're doing, you know, and it's not like I talk to everybody all the time, but I really like to know, you know, to work in a team, but also to be connected to everybody at the winery and to make sure that they believe in our dream of making Argentine wines that stand with the best of the world, that it's not just the dream held by a few of the managers. And that's something that, you know, I've brought to the winery. And, you know, at first my dad was a little reluctant because he was like, well, why are you talking to so many people? You know, you just need to stick to the boss people. And then after a couple of years, he is the biggest fan of teamwork. And like he says it all the time, like, I like teamwork, you know. But that was the main thing that I think was really different from my approach to my dad's. But today I would say he really believes in teamwork.
So one last question. Well, I actually have two questions. When I've had these events with Nesty, and I've had 3 with Nesty.
Oh yes, Nesty, it's his birthday today.
Yeah, and that's why we have you, is because it's his birthday. He wasn't available, and we got upgraded.
I am so proud to be like the second choice, like because Nesty. If I was going to a wine tasting, my first, second, third choice would be Nesty. He is so much fun. He's amazing.
Well, he always sings an aria for us, so I was hoping you would sing.
Oh, no, I am so bad. My daughter could sing for you, but I would have had to warn her.
Okay. Well, my serious last question, and I always ask this question at the end of these tastings we do, and I'm not asking you what is the best wine you've ever tasted. That's not the question. My question is, what's the most memorable experience you've had in your life in wine?
Well, I'd have to say it's 1939 Latour, because it's a wine that I bought for my father's 70th birthday, and it took me a long time to find it. And I took it, I bought it from Europe, you know, then I took it to Argentina, and we went to this really nice restaurant with my husband and my dad to celebrate his birthday. It was actually a few months after his birthday because I didn't get the bottle on time. So there was this whole drama about getting the bottle. Then we go and celebrate his birthday, and then the cork crumbles completely because they didn't have one of those special openers that you're supposed to have at a fancy restaurant. And, you know, I'm panicking. Of course, my dad is totally calm. He couldn't care less. He was so happy to be there with me and my husband, but I'm really stressed out. And so we get the little tea strainer and we get the decanter and we pour the wine, and it's just the most glorious thing. Like, it still had fruit, it had aromas, it was just delicious. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, this wine was made the same year that my dad was born. And then I actually started texting my friend Larry Stone because I'm thinking, oh my God, this must be a falsified wine. You know, in 1939 can't be this good. And he answers, nobody's falsifies 1939 because, you know, it was like the beginning of the war. It was a really bad rainy vintage, but somehow it was a very special wine. So because of all those reasons, that is the most memorable wine that I've ever tasted.
You know, I mentioned earlier that I took those 4 days of classes and took the Master Sommelier exam. In the room where they had those classes and the exam, there were 10 tables, schoolroom type tables for 2. I walked in the first morning and sat down. I was in jeans and a sports shirt. And this guy sat down next to me in a 3-piece suit. And I knew I was in trouble because if he was going to pass and I wasn't, because he was dressed appropriately, and it was Larry.
Oh my God.
And we have been very good friends ever since.
Oh,
and I learned more listening to him than I did from the guys teaching the classes. The first class was on Madeira. I don't think most of us in the room had actually ever tasted Madeira or really knew much about it or even where the island was located. And Barry Larvin, the president of the Court of Master Sommeliers, was teaching. At that time, there were 32 Master Sommeliers in the world. And the president of the Court of Master Sommeliers is teaching this class on Madeira. And about 5 minutes into his presentation, Larry raised his hand and he said, excuse me, what you just said is not accurate.
Oh my God, that's so classic Larry.
And Barry Lawrence said, well, Mr. Stone, what is it that you find wrong? And he said, well, you said there are 4 allowable grapes grown on the island. You know, I was there last month. Larry, I was on the island of Madeira last month. Who's been to Madeira? Anyway, Larry said, I was there last month and there's 5 hectares of Tempranillo on the north side of the
Oh
island.
my
of Santa
God.
Maria. And they said, well, that's interesting, Mr. Stone. We'll check on that and get back to you this afternoon. And they came back that afternoon and said, we're very surprised to tell you that Mr. Stone is right and we're wrong. There is actually a 5-hectare plot of Tempranillo on the north side of the island. And I mean, you know, it was over at that point. I mean, he knew more than they did.
I would never want to be teaching a class that Larry was the student at. That would be really scary.
Oh my God. I mean, you know, he's so knowledgeable about so many things. It's not just about wine. He's, you know, he was a history professor at one point. I mean, he's this complete intellectual.
Amazing. He's also one of my dearest friends. Like,
oh gosh, I can't believe I can't wait to tell him I talked to you tonight. I think we have a tasting of lingua franca in the next couple of weeks.
Well, he will remember this 1939 Latour story because I'm sure he remembers everything.
Oh, he absolutely remembers. You know, he made wine when he was 11 years old.
Oh my, I know. He's incredible. Yeah.
So, well, this, you know, I have to tell you, I've done a lot of these. You know, with very famous chefs and very famous winemakers and very famous winery owners. You know, Thomas Keller and, you know, some very Larry, Christian Moreau and Gaia and, you know, some pretty amazing people since March. I'm in awe. I logged on tonight in awe of the person that I was going to spend an hour or so talking to. I think you and your winery are extraordinary. I don't know how you can remember all the wines you make because I can't remember them all. There's so many different specific wines, and they're all, as I said earlier, the $10 wine is the best $10 wine in the market. The $18 wine is the best $18 wine in the market, and $300 wine is the best $300 wine in the market. That's my opinion of Catena Zapata.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor to be invited, and for all of you, our friends, to take time from your evening to share with us. And you know, I'm particularly happy. I don't want to say anything bad about the people with their camera off, but I'm happy that a lot of people have their camera on. That means a lot to me because I like to look at your beautiful faces.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Oh, I'm clapping for you. Thank you very much, everybody.
And we should thank Emma at Great Waters Financial for putting this whole thing together.
Oh, thanks,
yes,
Emma.
by all means. Bravo, Emma.
Yeah, bravo, Emma. She really worked hard to make this happen.
Thank you, Emma.
She really worked hard to make this happen.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Everybody.
Thank you, Laura.
Muchas
Thank you,
gracias.
Michael. Thank you, Doug.
See you in Argentina. In Argentina after COVID. First trip to Argentina, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you,
a
Emma.
great evening. Muchas gracias.
Thank you,
Thank
Laura.
you.
See you in Argentina. Thank you very much.
This Cabernet Franc is fantastic.